The relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States is a complex issue that necessitates a thorough historical examination of the island's past, particularly its interactions with both the Spanish Empire and the United States. Puerto Rico is classified as a territory rather than a state within the US. This raises questions about the origins of this political status, the historical events that led to Puerto Rico's incorporation into the US sphere, and the reasons it has not achieved statehood or independence. The island's first known inhabitants were the Taino people, who encountered Christopher Columbus and the Spanish upon their arrival in 1493 during his second voyage. The Taino culture faced significant destruction under Spanish colonial rule. The written history of Puerto Rico commenced with Columbus's arrival, during which he noted the presence of gold in the island's rivers, leading to its designation as Puerto Rico, meaning rich port. As Spain emerged as a dominant global power through its extensive colonies in the Americas, Puerto Rico experienced a transformation in its political and economic landscape. The island began exporting luxury goods such as sugarcane, coffee, and tobacco, while simultaneously importing African slaves. The Caribbean region was rife with conflict, prompting Puerto Rico to serve as a military outpost, leading to the construction of two significant forts, San Felipe del Moro and San Cristobal. The period of Spanish rule profoundly influenced Puerto Rico's political, cultural, and religious evolution, making it essential to understand this context to address the question of Puerto Rico's current status. Rico is not a US state. Rather, it represents Puerto Rico's final moments under the Spanish Empire and its subsequent acquisition by the United States following the Treaty of Paris, which concluded the Spanish-American War in 1898. In 1868, a group of Puerto Ricans from the town of Leiris attempted a revolt but were ultimately defeated. This uprising marked the inception of national parties, the movement towards the abolition of slavery and the quest for autonomy. The Spanish-American War, which erupted in 1898, was largely fueled by American responses to the Cuban uprising that spanned from 1895 to 1898. The United States was concerned about the instability caused by the conflict and was incensed by actions. Additionally, the United States sought to eliminate European empires from the Americas. In 1898, an explosion aboard a United States battleship in Havana Harbor heightened tensions. In April of that year, the United States recognized Cuban independence, prompting Spain to declare war on the United States, which Congress subsequently endorsed. On May 1st, the US Navy achieved a decisive victory over a Spanish fleet in the Pacific, and US troops landed in Cuba in June, where they overcame Spanish garrisons. By July 3rd, the US Navy had defeated the Spanish Caribbean Squadron. A ceasefire was established on August 12th, and the war officially concluded with the signing of the Treaty of Paris on December 10th. As a result, Spain was compelled to guarantee Cuba's independence and cede Guam and Puerto Rico to the United States, effectively selling Puerto Rico for $20 million. However, immediate steps to incorporate Puerto Rico into the United States were not undertaken until a 1901 ruling by the United States Supreme Court, in which Justice White participated. In a legal context, Puerto Rico's relationship with the United States has been characterized as foreign in a domestic framework. In 1917, the United States Congress enacted a new constitution for the island, granting its residents full US citizenship. During World War II, there were increasing calls for greater autonomy for Puerto Rico, leading President Harry Truman to appoint a native-born governor in 1946. This occurred shortly after Puerto Ricans were granted the right to elect their own governor. In 1952, Congress approved a constitution that effectively provided Puerto Rico with enhanced local governance. Now, let us examine the discussions surrounding US policy during that period and the reasons why Puerto Rico did not achieve statehood. Various experts have offered multiple explanations. One perspective suggests that the United States aimed to assert its dominance in the Americas while simultaneously diminishing European influence in the region. Additionally, it has been argued that there was insufficient political pressure on the US government to grant Puerto Rico either statehood or independence. Concerns were also raised that the US might be at a disadvantage if it failed to acquire territories, especially as European powers were actively expanding their colonial empires across the Americas, Africa, and Asia, despite Spain's declining status as a global power. Another theory posits that the US government viewed Cuba as the primary target for expansion due to its strategic location in the Caribbean, being in close proximity to the United States. Acquiring Puerto Rico may have been perceived as a means to safeguard American military interests. Ural Mende-Bardio, a professor specializing in Puerto Rican, Caribbean, and Latin American history at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, has remarked that by 1898 or late 1897, Cubans were confident in their impending victory in the war for independence against Spain. It is within this context that the United States chose to intervene. He asserts that Puerto Rico remains a colonial possession of the United States, and that prevailing discriminatory attitudes regarding Puerto Rico's capacity for self-governance continue to exist. Another perspective suggests that the United States primarily focused on Cuba, with the acquisition of Puerto Rico being a secondary outcome. This notion is supported by the actions taken by the United States during the 1898 Spanish-American War, particularly the initial military engagements where US forces targeted Spanish troops and positions in and around Cuba. Additionally, the sympathies of the American public towards the Cuban cause further bolster this argument. Some observers have noted that Congress's hesitance to grant statehood to Puerto Rico is influenced by concerns over financial implications and the potential voting patterns that would emerge. Given that Puerto Rico is likely to lean Democratic, the addition of 2 extra Democratic senators could place Republicans at a disadvantage. The most significant impact of statehood would likely be felt in the Senate, but it could also alter the dynamics of presidential elections. These considerations highlight the complexities surrounding Puerto Rico's political status. Puerto Ricans express support for statehood. However, this support is not unanimous. This is evident from the outcomes of the 2020 referendum, which revealed a divided opinion among Puerto Ricans regarding the island's potential statehood. In the non-binding referendum, 52% of voters favored statehood, while 47% opposed it. The implications of these referendums for Puerto Rico remain uncertain. Historically, Puerto Rico has been a significant crossroads in the Americas. The arrival of the Spanish marked the end of indigenous cultural dominance and ushered in an era characterized by slavery and new economic markets. The island became integrated into the Spanish Empire, establishing economic, cultural, and political ties with other regions under Spanish rule. The majority of Puerto Rico's documented history occurred during its time as a Spanish territory. Political developments on the island created a distinctive situation prior to its acquisition by the United States. The Spanish-American War of 1898 and the subsequent American victory resulted in Puerto Rico becoming a U.S. territory. Some argue that the United States' involvement in this conflict was primarily motivated by its interests in Cuba, with Puerto Rico's acquisition being a secondary outcome. Ultimately, Puerto Ricans were granted U.S. citizenship in 1917 and gained increased local governance in 1952. Experts have proposed various reasons for Puerto Rico's current status. A state, along with many of the reasons supporting its establishment, may still be relevant today. For instance, the consequences of introducing new senators and representatives could significantly influence the future political landscape of the United States if such changes were to take place. The opinions of Puerto Ricans on this matter appear to be mixed. Recent referendums indicate a desire among some residents for the islands to achieve statehood. However, the true implications of these referendums for a possible transition to statehood will only become clear with the passage of time.